We're going to roll the dice again to find something else to add to this. But we're going to use this dice instead because I lost the other dice and I wanted to do something else anyways, so that works out fine. We're going to roll this dice. We're going to take not one, but the amount described on the dice from this. And then we're going to also find something in a text document in my files on my computer, which will correspond to one of the numbers on this dice. And we will merge whatever the topic of that text document is with this and what we've worked on so far this week. So here we go. 7. I don't know what that means in role-playing games because I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I just have Dungeons and Dragon dice. Alright, I'll be back. I applied the 4 elements to the 4 cardinals, and I got the idea of using ice as a very malleable crystal for distortion. Remember, one of the first things I did in this video thing that I'm doing, these entries, was look through a crystal, but ice is kind of very varied in its distortion based off shape. And I don't know why I'm putting ice up against a camera. I probably shouldn't. But it has a unique, like every ice cube has a unique distortion. And it's very easy to change. It's hard to hold because it's ice. It's melting as I hold it. But it has a unique shape each time it's made. It's a crystal, like most things, or not like a true crystal, I don't think. It's like its own thing, but it's like glass, so it distorts what's behind it. But it does have the chance of becoming white, too, so it's interesting. I will be back in a second after I find a way to hold it easier. It's having a hard time looking through that, but that is a distorted leaf sticker on the window. It's literally melting as I'm holding it. But what I wanted to do was shape it in a specific way using fire. So I'm going to be back. I could probably use a better piece of ice, but what I'm getting at is that ice is probably the best resource for making distortions of space and thus perceiving world distortions, but it does come with the consequence of weight, which is a natural part of its behavior, but it's not liking the focus. It's too transparent and it doesn't know where to position its focus, but yeah, if I had a better piece of ice, it would work better. Natural ice is usually better. Yeah, apparently this entire project revolves around water. That wasn't even intentional. I just keep finding wonders in water. The reason there's black stuff on it is because the lighter fluid got stuck to the water, which is another thing, is that you can get stuff inside it to distort it in a variety of ways, unlike I don't know, a diamond or any sort of jewel. Water is very spatially manipulatable. Like my finger isn't adding up properly to the like it looks like it has like a pointy part when it doesn't. And this reminds me of the idea that liquids are another space, like another kind of literal space, like the space around this water, that has a different function or law to it compared to the space in space and around us right now. You travel through it differently, you behaves differently, but ice is a solid version of that space, or at the very least it's an artificial kind. Water is fascinating and pretty. Kinda looks cool, this piece of ice. It's also not a hard chemical to make, and it's in vast plenty on the planet. But yeah, water is important. Yeah, like you can see the red in the water when it's not supposed to be there because the light distorted. So if I had a clearer piece, I might be able to see something else. Also, technically, that white stuff is a cloud frozen in water in itself. It's a similar property to how clouds form, and it's just a natural part of the whole water substance. But it also does this when you put fire up against it. Nothing except melt. So they also have a very unique ability to melt into balance, if that makes sense. Like, they'll literally melt in a way that ends up supporting what, like if I hold on to it and squeeze it to help it melt, it'll melt according to its where it's melting, and it'll take on a unique shape based off of what is in the way. I'm hypnotized by water right now because it's fascinating. But if I push on this like this, you can see it melting. And while its weight isn't perfect, it took on a flatter shape. So if we go, it's slippery though. It broke. I broke it. It's not going to support on that part, but it's cool. Yeah. I was originally going to talk about the reflection, but you'd have to dye this silver somehow to get that achievement, or black to make like a black ice, like a real black ice, not like the stuff you see on the ground that you don't see while driving. I could also color this with markers, but I don't feel like breaking my markers. The thing about it is that it's a very simple way to create a crystal that lets you distort the space in your perception. The only downside is that it's really cold. But yeah, it's interesting. You can also do it with normal water. You just shape a container accordingly, and it will distort. But I think I've talked enough about water. Here is a very large meaning math equation where water plus faith plus madness divided by wisdom minus fear equals something. We'll get to that. But I just wanted to mention in normal math, multiplication is very important. But in meaning math, it's completely useless because I have no idea how you multiply water times this. Like, water times, I don't know, a small word like pile. How do you multiply water times pile? It doesn't work. But in a similar respect, Aver, or hashtag, I just used that symbol when I first started this, and that's how it doesn't really do anything of spectacular use in normal math, because like this is basically what it would do. It would be one equals the exact same thing, because it's not one, it's not an addition, it's like the two as they are, like this, like a drawing. So it's not like, I think science calls it concatenation, but I'm not even sure. It works well in meaning math though, which is this stuff, and that's what I was getting at. Anyways, this would be water, so I don't know, I'll have to calculate it on my own to figure out what it is, because it's kind of long and I need to write stuff down to organize it properly, but I'll be back. This is the original file. We're going to count the the text documents. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one? Wait. Double checking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. That is really old. I don't know what it is. I don't remember it, so I'm going to read that, come back to our topic. Mostly about the 4 basic cardinal spirits, or like the base of what I started this entire concept with, which is faith, wisdom, fear, and madness, or metaphorical, internal human concepts of fire, water, earth, and air. But I have an idea of how we can apply that to it. So I'll be back. So we've got our idea from the dice, sigils, which we did before, light shapes, which was the original source of all of this idea, physics based off of weight, physics based off of water for the most part, weight, manipulation, the 4 cardinals of the mind, or like they don't actually have to be these. It's very subjective what you base your source information on. These ones are just the ones I chose at the beginning, because there's actually lots of stuff outside this, but these 4 elements are not really the phases, but are a unique. There's a difference between them, and I'll get into that in a second when I advance this entire concept with all these words. We're not going to do it in any particular order. We're just going to kind of mix and match the different concepts to create different things. So I'm going to take a bit of stuff from each thing. Or actually, I'm going to start with these applied to weight manipulation. Then we'll just mess with the variables a bit. Okay. For wisdom, I went with just figuring out how to measure the stuff. For faith, control them acausally, so like using magic to make things fall in a certain direction with coincidence. Semi-useful, but you could improve that basic concept with wisdom and make it known by the individual. A fear that comes along with that is it's hard to predict when you don't know how the object works, if that makes sense. So like, if you didn't know this always falls like this from any position that it's in, like that, or in other contexts, it's very like dangerous, I guess, because the nature of these, like, this isn't a rock, but you can make them harder and stuff. It's just, in a violent situation, not good. But shields work every time for that, because yeah, it's all about the mass. So unless you're making a super heavy thing, which you can also do with this, as long as it's above the weight of the mass, it shouldn't cause a problem. So we'll get into solutes later, but that's an example of a solute. It's solving a fear, like a problem with it, with another concept. But the crazy idea, madness, is anti-gravity, which is when something travels in the opposite direction of what gravity does. And the only thing that is known to do that is balloons. They don't defy gravity, they just behave that way because they're lighter. And so they tend to move up higher on in the atmosphere. because when you put oil in a bottle, it floats on top of the water and won't. I think it does. Yeah, and corn syrup will sink to the bottom. It works because of that, and that's why you can't have balloons in space, because they will reach the top of where they can sit and they'll just stay there. But it does work as, in a sense, of anti-gravity, at least on Earth, where it matters. In space, it's not so relevant because everything just floats anyways. So, yeah, that's one way of doing it, is with a lighter object and a balloon. So, like, filling it with helium and making it hollow and very thin and light may allow you to have counter-gravity objects without having the entire area become anti-gravity and a mess. But that is one way to do it. You can also use drones to carry heavier objects, but they have to be powerful. So, yeah. Okay. I had to redo this, that's why everything's already written. I don't know why that matters, but we're gonna do, or I did, an equation with meaning math that does something. It makes a new use for something. But I just wanted to mention that multiplication and AVER are incompatible with math and meaning math inversely. So multiplication doesn't work, at least in my current knowledge, with meaning, because water times pile doesn't make sense to me, and I don't know what to do with it. You'd have to add like a number, and then it's just strange. It doesn't work exactly the same, and it like leads to like a different way of using meaning math. But AVER doesn't really do anything in math. It just does 1 equals 1. Not overly useful. It's kind of used in like numbers higher than 10 or even 10, just because that's how you organize the number. But it's just something I don't know how to use in either. I've tried using both in both. Anyways, I took water, I listed some of its properties, I subtracted them from themselves, so I ended up with a concept of colorless, weightless state that made me think of hallucinations or spectral stuff, like the white noise. And I thought I kind of compared it to the water, and that reminded me of using nothing to distort objects. So I'm going to try to show you how that works. But it's nowhere near as startling as it might seem if you try it. Like, it is literally using nothing to distort an object, so don't expect it to be like the most fascinating thing to see, but it is something you can do, and it has a use somewhere, which we'll work with in a second. But you see this post, and what you do, I probably shouldn't have focused it on the post, but if you visualize this coming down, just cuz, like bending, if you follow my finger, it sort of comes down with it. And if I let go and you just visualize it, you should be able to see it fall. If you try, at least. I don't know. That's one example of how you can kind of artificially manipulate the the post in some way. And it helps to do that too because it creates a motion blur that makes it look more like it's doing it. But I have no idea how to make that more vivid. I've been trying for a while. I don't know. But it does work to some degree. You can also bend that thing. It's mostly just putting your mind in front, like the mental perception in front of and overlay the object with itself, and then cause it to tip a bit, or like bend. Yeah. It's cool, but I don't know. It's another trick for manipulating a stable environment when you don't have any way of using technology within accessible ranges at the time, or like you don't have rocks with special weight manipulation in them. You can use that kind of thing. So I think we'll do something with the more faith-related technology than the more objective ones because I am limited in my environment. So yeah. It's also fun to just mess with the meaning math and the variables that you've created to see what it like unlocks, like a video game. So I think I'm just going to do that for a bit and find something else inside this specified universe that's fun, because a lot of this stuff is limited without proper technology. These things are like the basic primitive version, or like not the primitive version, because I guess the primitive version would be just a rock. This is a modern version, but the advanced version would require more technological effort and stuff like that. So I'm gonna I'm gonna mess with these things, and I'll be back with something interesting. We've concluded that light does in fact change the state of a piece of matter depending on its circumstance and variables and whatnot. Like it'll either stay the same, turn into a liquid from a solid, into a gas, or into a plasma. But we haven't actually figured out how these basic phases then become bonds or geometries that are different from their current one with light. And I don't know if light really does anything about geometry or bonds other than maybe deconstruct bonds and thus change the geometry. But I wanted to discuss the specter thing that we did earlier, where it's like carried along by something. And there's no real knowledge about what's between the light and the specter. So this spot seems open to interpretation, and so we're going to see how white noise affects coincidence with light. And like, I don't know if you can see the darker portion, it's very dark colors, and then as it approaches the light, the colors become brighter. And I might be able to put a photo in here that would show a clearer example, but it is filtered and altered. But I'll show it in a second if I can. It'll be there. If it's not, then it won't be. it's really hard to, like, you can use white light as a way to see the hallucinations in reality. Like, you can use a white wall to see the white noise when with your own perception. It's hard to capture on camera because it needs to be in a dark room with white light. But it's really easy to capture the darker colors on camera, if that makes sense. Just because it's easier for the filter on the camera to detect those things. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to see how this kind of stuff, where it's distorted, affects coincidental shifts through light, because there seems to be some effect. Like the distortion is different here than it is over here. Like, you can see colors here, but you can only see weight here. You can still see the distortion, but it's not as colorful as here. So there's something there. And even if this isn't an actual thing, the concept of coincidental physics, which are more like virtual physics, is still an able theory that you can manipulate. Like, you can create metaphysics for how magic works in relation to the coincidence, whether or not. What is that? I don't know what that is. Oh, it's the lens flare from the camera. It's just a little dot. It's vibrating and gone. Anyways, we're going to figure out how light affects coincidence and specter material, or we're going to create some way of explaining it. I don't know how far we'll get with that, but it'll be interesting. So I'll be back. These are our three concepts related to the question of will. Are they determined? Is it like this is guaranteed to fall this way? Is it free, meaning it wants to? Or is it a seed where, depending on its previous condition, it does what it does? Or does it want to just 'cause? That's how it feels. There's no real way to distinguish any of these from the other. So when I said seed, it's not even quite accurate, because you could just as easily say it's all determined, because, well, the seed is always the same, or the free, or you could also say the freedom of it is its own will, and the seed doesn't have to exist if it doesn't need to, because all three of these, plus in relation to the concept of will, are sort of like that video I did where certain things are uncertain or unfalsifiable to make them almost not, like, that's an unfalsifiable claim too, but they're undemonstratable without further evidence that I'm not sure how you'd find. So that you can almost just decide by your own desire which of these you want. And they might even all work together in a sort of complex way of interaction, which we might need to do for the spectre kind of material, because like, spectre stuff seems quite free. It's always directly related to the will. Like, I can say I want to find pizza and then find pizza. I don't know why I'd pick up pizza on the ground, but seed is always a predictive measure, And determined is like the guarantee that it will happen in that specific case. So like, yes, if the seed is like the determined portion, like if the seed is 5 and 5 always results in 6, it will always be that case as long as whatever's between it isn't changed in some way. But that doesn't really affect the idea of